We all know what the sole purpose test is. Well, I'm assuming we do. However, what I need to know is when the sole surviving or even the youngest member of a fund finally turns 65, does the sole purpose test then become redundant? Consequences, for example, if the fund owns a rental property, can family members now live in that rental property? But the main query relates to the role of the sole purpose test once the youngest member attains age 65. Thank you. And that is from Paul.
Yeah, thanks, Paul. Look, this is, again, it's a common query we're getting. In fact, it's probably the third or fourth time we've covered this off in recent webinars. So webinars we've run this calendar year. So it's obviously a common question, a common issue that we need to look at. I note that you do say we all know what the sole purpose test is. Look, thanks, Paul, for that. With due respect and not trying to be rude here, unfortunately, I'm not sure I agree that we all understand what the sole purpose test is. And the fact that we're getting this question a lot suggests there is still some confusion around it. So hopefully I can assist with that confusion. What I've given you here are two very separate ATO regulator references for you. And this pretty much sums up the issue. So I just want to take you through these two things, okay? The first one is taken directly from the ATO website, which says your self-managed super fund or your super fund needs to meet the sole purpose test to be eligible for the tax concessions normally available to super funds. This means your fund needs to be maintained for the sole purpose of providing retirement benefits to your members or their dependents if a member dies before retirement. It doesn't say, and the legislation doesn't say, that your fund needs to be maintained for the sole purpose until you start paying pensions. It's throughout that as well. I mean, otherwise, if you think about this, you could start using tax concessed assets held in superannuation, like a property, where, for instance, if you're in pension phase, all the income's tax-free, you could start living in it and not charging rent, giving a benefit to members with your retirement savings. It's not really what the sole purpose test is for. The sole purpose test applies whilst your fund is still in existence. And in fact, if we go to a self-managed super fund ruling, so these are the ATO specific legal rulings relevant to, in this case, self-managed funds. SMSFR 2008-2 sets out that a trustee must maintain an SMSF in a manner that complies with the sole purpose test at all times while the SMSF is in existence. And this extends to all activities undertaken by the SMSF during its life cycle. So really, to answer your question, the sole purpose test needs to be adhered to throughout the entire life of the fund. You need to ensure that those strict compliance obligations, including the sole purpose tests, are adhered to at all times. Whilst the property is still held inside the fund, if you then lease the asset, being a residential property, to a member or a related party, it will result in that property becoming an in-house asset and be included in the 5% test. So you don't get out of the in-house assets test, you don't get out of the sole purpose test merely because we've entered into retirement phase or we're all in pension phase. It still needs to be met. The one other point I want to make here is I mentioned that whilst the property is an asset of the fund, any lease or lease arrangement. What I mean by that is obviously you would usually see a written lease in place that covers the terms of the lease. The super rules suggest that even if there isn't a lease in place, there's a lease arrangement in place. So the sole purpose test still needs to be adhered to at all times while it's an asset of the fund. just for what it's worth, I know you mentioned you understand the sole purpose test. Have a look at the article which was published on the website, What is the Sole Purpose Test and How Does It Work? It does give you more of an insight into the sole purpose test and the regulator's intentions on why the sole purpose test exists.